Good evening, everybody. So tonight we're going to do another map. We're going to talk about gold, silver, and copper in the state of Massachusetts. So the objective here is to kind of look a little bit where you'd find gold. And again, this is kind of completing that loop around the northeast of the continental United States. And by no means is this a complete picture of all the gold in all the states. We're still continuing through that. But it is a interesting point that in the Northeast, there is gold, silver, and copper that has been located. There's also evidence that there might be more gold and there is silver in the streams in the area. So I just thought I'd kind of poke at that a little bit tonight. And so let's go about looking at what we have. Again, as I've mentioned before, take a look at the link below about gold maps and how I make these things and put them together, kind of the techniques I'm using to identify the locations and what they mean, because it's more important to know what the locations mean to you than necessarily knowing exactly where somebody found gold before. The purpose of this exercise isn't to find someone else's gold mine. The purpose is to find where you might be able to find gold in the future based on where somebody else had a gold mine. See the difference? It has implications about where you might go look for gold, but that's in that report down below, sourdoughminer.com, GGM, or Government Gold Maps. Go take a look at that link and understand what you're looking at. So for tonight, we're going to go look at Massachusetts. We're going to look at gold, and we've been doing this theme earlier this month on, looking at a couple of related metals. So in this case, silver and copper, because I think it helps us understand what we're looking for. It's also indicative that when we looked for gold in Massachusetts, there really aren't that many mines that have been located. When you look for silver and copper, you find this pattern that I'll talk about. And that's the thing you do with the maps, and that's why I want you to learn how to use them and how to read them. So let's take a look real quick. So now we're going to go check, as we always do, to make sure we're on, because we've had this Murphy problem with the audio or the video getting messed up by Facebook. That was what happened this last time. Yours truly messes it up often enough. So let's take a look. There it is. Okay, so we've got people on board. We've got 3 comments so far. Gonna go down. Marlon Jones is watching. Hey, Marlon. And Bob's on, North Carolina. There he is. And Victor Fraser, nice, #1, closer to Maine. Closer to Maine. And we talked about Maine a couple of weeks back, so go check that out, Victor. And let me know what you think. You'll find it here on the Facebook page or over on YouTube, on the YouTube videos. It's already been posted. Look, search for gold in Maine, or find gold in Maine. You'll find that. So let's see. Gary is looking good. Okay. Bob says Ohio's here, keeping with the good work. Enjoy the teachings. Good. Good. And Eli's here. Arkansas is here. So let's get rolling. What we're looking at right now, I'm assuming the audio is coming through fine. I could turn it up a little bit. Eli's here. There we go. Okay, so I confirmed that I have audio and we're good to go. So now let's take a look at what's going on here in Massachusetts. So let's flip it over to this one. Okay, and so what we're looking at here is Massachusetts, and you can kind of see a pattern right off the bat. This is what caught my attention. I see a mine over here that the yellow ones mean gold. The silver ones I have designated to be, not silver, the blue ones I designate to be silver, and the coppery red color is copper. So that kind of makes it obvious. Now what you're going to see is, right now, just glancing at the state, I see gold here, I see gold here, here, and up here, and nowhere else really. And so that's an interesting story in itself. Here's one right over here, but it's a smelting and refining near downtown Boston, which is kind of like what we saw in Chicago. These are big cities, old school, where a lot of the metals were smelted and turned into coinage and things like that. So let's take a look at what's going on at these different sites. But what we have really is kind of a triangle of gold here, and then not much else in the way of gold. We have a band of copper and silver right through the middle here, and a little bit of copper over here, and some copper and gold up here. So Now remember, we discovered earlier when we talked about Maine and we talked about New Hampshire and so forth, we kind of had this pattern developing across here that indicated that kind of this coastal region may have some enrichment in gold. And so that is why I'm not surprised at finding a few mines up in this area, because it would be part of that same enriched area along the continental margins. Part of what makes all that happen is ancient activity of the plates and shifting, and now it's eroded down, but the gold, the residue and the lode mines still remain of what's left. Now this one is a Dracut nickel mine, okay? Happens to mention nickel, gold, silver, and copper as the primary commodity, past producer. I don't know what age we had production there. Let's take a look real quick. And we go down and we find that the reference here is 1956, 1943. So there is some indication that it's more recent production. Don't know how that fits into the equation. Oh, I didn't check the one thing we got to do here, and it is unknown. It doesn't say whether it's placer or lode. My suspicion is it's lode. We're going to find that up in here when we see the copper and gold together. That gives me an indication that what we're talking about largely is, see, this is lead and then has tertiary commodities of zinc, copper, gold, and silver. So these are probably sulfides, and that's what we were seeing up in the Maine area along the coast, was a lot of sulfides in lode. Very different animal from crystalline gold found in quartz. And so that's just an important side effect of what we're looking for. Here's one facility. So this is another lab that refines silver and refines gold. So this, again, when you do your search, you can narrow it down to say what type of gold discovery you're looking for. I left it wide open, and that brings in these labs. Sometimes it's interesting, gives you a little bit of history. Oftentimes it's just a nuisance, but there aren't very many of them. But that does tell us that a handful of the ones we discovered where we thought they're, why are these here, are simply that they're refining plants, gold smelters. So let's go over here into this section by Northampton, okay? And what we're going to find when we go in here is some interesting stuff. First thing, I want to go out here and look at this Cleveland mine. That had iron, gold, and sulfur. Remember we talked sulfides? So it says it's an underground, so it's a lode mine. And this is a lode sulfide find. Let's take a look closely and see what we find. 1980, 1981, there's reports. There is 1945, 1899. So you see there's a smattering of things here all over the timeline that tell us this is a relatively old mine in this area. And so what we have is kind of an interesting underground lode mine with sulfides in it. And that's really kind of what's the story. Now, the reason why I wanted to go over there is that it was kind of a orphan, sort of sitting off in the corner. The thing of interest here is all this copper up in here, which should have the same kind of property of being, there we go, sulfur pyrite, okay? So this is copper and sulfur pyrite, aka chalcopyrite, okay? Copper iron pyrite is a special material because it can possess or has an affinity for gold. So this guy, so that's chalcopyrite. So when you're looking for the kind of thing they're pulling out here, this is the kind of ore that would potentially hold some gold as well as copper. It doesn't have to, but oftentimes it does. And so it's worthy of getting tested to find out how many, what's the stoichiometric, they call it, what's the ratio of gold to iron and copper and sulfur in this mineral, because it can replace the copper, the gold can, as well as silver and some other elements, including platinum and some rare earths. So it's worthy of note to kind of, whenever you get one of these pyrite kind of intrusions, you want to check it out. This one says copper underground. So again, we're talking lode mines in these areas. Here's a Beardston magnetite occurrence. Come on, pull. So this has iron, copper, and sulfur. So it has magnetite, and then it has some copper and some sulfur. Now, when you see copper and sulfur, again, it's chalcopyrite. If you saw iron and sulfur, then it's iron pyrite, which is the more typical fool's gold. The chalcopyrite has an interest because it can hold this gold in it. Now, let's look at some of these guys. These are silver mines. So they're producing galena, or probably galena is sulfide, and silver is my suspicion. It's unknown as to whether it's underground or on top. It's just a prospect. Here's a Loudville mine, which is underground, so it's a lode mine. Barium, barite, lead, silica, silver, and zinc. So there's a pretty broad spectrum of elements coming out of that mine. Here's another copper barite. So there's a lot of barium and barite. Barium's kind of an interesting material in its own right, and so worthy of note in terms of commodities that can be had. Beryllium's another one that's really valuable, extremely valuable in the general purpose industry to make beryllium. It's also kind of toxic, but they use it to make beryllium springs and contacts because it can be formed with copper to make a strong form of copper that makes springs that can be used that are highly conductive and have interesting properties for things like motors and stuff like that. It's amazing how many things in the regime of material support for modern technology, aka green energy, require these more rare minerals and require lode mining to produce. You know, they don't grow on trees. You can't plant them and put sunshine on them and some fertilizer. You have to dig them out of the ground and refine them. And so it is never a free lunch in this business. What you have to know is, what are the trade-offs? And in this case, you know, these are places that have been known for trade-offs for centuries, some of these mines, and it's just worthy of knowing. Here's another smelting works for copper. So this one is known for doing some smelting processing of copper in the past. Be curious if it has anything about, it says West New England Smelting Works Incorporated. I wonder how old this thing is, because I kept thinking of Paul Revere and all of his silver work, you know, and that just made me think of another history point. So this one says white metal alloys, solder, spelter, and tin, lead, T-metal, and Babbitt. Babbitt is a copper alloy that's used commonly for bearing surfaces in motors, engines, and large machinery. It's very capable of holding up huge rotating machines, such as the turbines in a hydropower station. You know, we're talking gigawatt kind of size things. And they'll use Babbitt for thrust bearings and for support bearings. And the reason is it has this interesting property that, you know, when oiled, it can actually dissipate heat well. It automatically sort of self-balances and has a bunch of fun stuff, but it's just pretty durable for that kind of use and doesn't oxidize as easily. It's a use for copper and other interesting stuff. So copper, brass, ingots, etc. And they don't have much mentioned here. I don't see 75, 76. I don't know what the dates are on this place. If anybody lives in the area, they could comment below. But I don't see anything in the USGS data about, you know, that particular smelter just outside of Springfield, Massachusetts. And so that's kind of what we have for tonight. It's pretty limited. Again, as we pointed out before, these areas, you know, where there is gold, especially up in these northern areas, matched what we'd seen before, where you have a lot of copper and silver and some sulfides and things like that. So it's kind of an interesting mix, a melange of elements that are coming out. What I don't know and don't see in here is the nugget production or placer gold production in the area, because none of them really mention much in the way of placer. It seems to be underground, similar to what we saw in Maine. And I know for a fact that people are pulling placer gold out in Maine. So it's something that a few of you from the region, I'd like you to comment below. If you're finding gold in Massachusetts, what kind of gold are you finding, and what do you typically do to produce it? And if you don't mind spreading the word, what areas? You know, I wouldn't be too specific, you know how that is. But you can tell people, look, in these areas I find it, or there's these limitations in terms of laws and all that stuff. I'm not that familiar with Massachusetts from a mining standpoint. I'm very familiar with Boston, because that is where the headquarters of the company I used to work for is, right here in downtown Boston, an outfit called Teradyne, and they're actually in the old area of Boston, down along the waterfront. Whether I can still find it or not, off of Market, kind of in a really seedy section that they helped turn their corner on, and is now a very expensive, popular place, typical of high tech. But the fellows who founded it were MIT grads and super brainy sort of entrepreneurial guys, and we ended up becoming the world's largest manufacturer for test equipment for semiconductors, and everything that goes into your cell phone, by and large, is tested on their equipment. And so I would have said our equipment, except I've been away from them for a while, so I don't lay claim to too much of that. Although I have a patent and on serial testing of digital signals with noise, which is actually exactly what goes into these guys, and how they test them is to apply some of the things we were doing to go no go the product once it was assembled. Does it work? Does it create? I mean, can it handle the signal? So anyway, that's it for tonight. I just thought I'd give you a quick shot into Boston and what goes on there, and what goes on in Massachusetts with gold, because we are talking gold, and we are still talking various states. We've covered the Northeast pretty thoroughly now. If you look around, you'll find most of them here on Facebook, or go over to YouTube and Google the state of your liking. If I missed one, let me know. But please go look first. The things I'm missing now are largely the center of the U.S. And a little bit, I need to cover Arkansas, and there's a couple others in there. So, and then we will kind of go a little international expedition for the fun of it. But that's it for tonight. I just thought I'd touch bases with you and show you another state, Massachusetts. Let's see. Good night, Justin. Any info or knowledge is good. Always willing to learn. Great, Bob. Good to see that. And Brian is in Valley Springs, California, along the Route 49 Gold Trail there. Let's see. How did you obtain this map? Take a look at the government gold maps. That was a question by Gary B. Crow. And if you look about gold maps, there's a link on this page. If you type that in, sourdoughminer.com/ggm/, there's a thing over there, a quick spiel about what I have. I have a report, and it's cheap, and it goes through in detail, because you can get these maps. They're just the MRDS, but what I'm doing is I'm using the MRDS in a specific way, and I'm using it to create these more customized images and so forth, so that you can easily print them out or put them on your phone, but also so you can interpret what's going on here. And that's what I cover in the report. Not just where do you find gold, a gold map, but what is the gold map, because you need to interpret it. And that's what I do. That's why I'm doing these videos, to give you a little smattering of what that's about, but the teaching really goes into it in more detail. So that's kind of the question, or answer to your question, Gary. What other minerals are fun to mine in Massachusetts? That's a good question. I didn't go into other minerals, and you can on the government gold maps. It doesn't just cover gold. In fact, I've done a couple of them on platinum. I've done some on diamonds for fun. That's a fun one. You can look up corundum. That's a ruby and that kind of stuff. Garnets. Not so much. Well, you can look up asbestos and things like that. You can look up mercury. You can look up. So you get the idea. You can look up different commodities. You can look up gravel. I did that on one of the shows a couple nights ago, just to give you an idea in the Midwest what you might do for the lack of gold prospects that are there. You can look up gravel pits, because gravel pits can contain gold, especially after glaciers have moved through and pulverized it and deposited it down underneath the gravel. Big hint. And so that's the thought here. Diamonds in Arkansas, that is correct. And anything in New Hampshire. And by the way, there's diamonds in a couple of other places, including there's a couple of kimberlite pipes here in California, interestingly enough. So, you know, that's one of the ones that the GGM doesn't cover as thoroughly as it could, and partly because there was a lot of pressure not to look for diamonds elsewhere other than in South Africa by De Beers, the big diamond Goliath, until it got the truth got cracked by some Canadian researchers and basically proved that there's more diamonds in Canada than there are in Africa, which is pretty funny. Or as many, but they're mining like crazy up there. And of course, De Beers was fighting like tooth and nail. Now they own a bunch of that property. So that's pretty funny, pretty telltale. But that also indicates that there are a lot of places where there are more ancient volcanoes, which is what forms a kimberlite pipe. It has to be a particular kind of pipe, a kimberlite or lamperite. And that rock has some properties that are conducive to the formation of diamonds from essentially from CO2 and carbon that's buried deep inside of the volcanic, chute. And so what happens is before it has a chance to combine with any oxygen, before it has a chance to do something to damage the mineral, it hardens into a diamond. And so that has to be just the right, as they say, just right. And so that's something to be aware of if you're looking for diamonds. They're around. If you're looking for rubies and emeralds, they're around. If you're looking for, in fact, by the way, I've looked for diamonds in my local area here in California, just as keep an eye out, okay? And you should too. It's like the platinum in the northern Klamath Mountains areas. It's just full of it, so keep your eyes out. And that's probably it for right now. Good enough. Good prospecting and good night. Prospector Jess, over and out.